Hey Ryan, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for your time. I mean, it's a pleasure to host you here. I mean, you've been working with IZEA for so long, and you're like the probably the company that started the industry, right? So, and by the way, I just went to your website, and this is I thought you started the industry, and I thought, and this is actually your tagline. Is how you describe yourself, correct?
We sure do. And my boss, Ted Murphy, is credited for being the pioneer of what is now called influencer marketing. But back
Uh-huh.
then, it didn't even have that phrase. People were
Yeah.
struggling to figure out what to call it. Was it social media sponsorship? For a weird second, it was native advertising. It was all these different things. But finally, around 2014, 2015, we thought, influencer marketing feels like the right term. And
Yeah.
now, today, in 2024, a decade later, we really consider that to be a subset of this broader creator economy that we so frequently talk about, which means a lot of things to a lot of people, but it all centers on authentic storytelling and doing so with a wide variety of voices and, of course, a wide variety of platforms.
Yes. So, just for the sake of any one of our listeners who doesn't know or never heard about IZEA, which I believe is not the case, right? So let's just
We
as a
hope not.
quick, I'm sure not. So let's just maybe do a quick intro about IZEA and about yourself, which I think is very interesting as well.
Sure, I'm happy to do so. So,
Thank you.
as you mentioned, IZEA pioneered the creator economy, and today we work across 14 different countries and 95 different markets, supporting brands big and small, as well as agencies to do a variety of things, whether that happens to be provide professional services. So, we do everything from concept through execution for large brands. We also provide award-winning software. So if you wish to do these things for yourself or in conjunction with our team, we
Mhm.
sell the ability to license that as well. And last but not least, we have a plethora of tools for creators and brands alike that you can license on a simple, inexpensive monthly basis. The largest of which we call is Form AI, which allows creators to bring really practical uses of machine learning and artificial intelligence into their workflows just to make their creation process that much more easy and scalable.
And
And for my,
yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, what are these functionalities that
Yeah, they go from everything from, gosh, what should be the hashtag clouds for a particular initiative? That's a very simplistic thing. To how might you develop still imagery or plus up video assets to do everything from upscaling them on resolution to developing images that would take tens of hours in a Photoshop or Illustrator by themselves.
Mhm, mhm. I mean, service is so important these days for a tech company, right? It used to be like, okay, I'm a SaaS company, it's enough. But no, I mean, if you look at the good companies, the good SaaS companies, they all have like this white glove type of professional services, which is, I think, very, very important for various type of customers in the industry. So when did you start this service initiatives and which platform and services target which type of customers?
Sure. So originally the company started off not named IZEA. It was called payperpost.com in the very
What?
early days. Very,
Really?
very quid pro quo, right, of what they were
Wow.
offering. And it
Okay.
predates my time with the company, but it really was credited for being the first marketplace that brought together people on this white hot platform, the TikTok of its day,
Hmm.
called MySpace, with brands.
Hmm.
And it was very successful in the first couple of years. But to your point, at a certain apogee in the timeline, there were large brands and some agencies who said, yes, I know I can do it for myself, but could you help us do it? We don't have the people right now. We have the interest, but not the time. So around 2010 or 14 years ago, IZEA started offering what we refer to as managed services,
Hmm.
which is a hybrid of things that you'd see from an agency and a consultancy, but wrapped around technology. Because different clients have wildly different needs and certainly different expectations on what they're looking for from an investment in the creator economy. For example, some Fortune 10 brands that we serve really outsource everything to IZEA. They simply say, look, you're the market leader, you created this space, you continue to innovate, tell us what we need to do, tell us how we should invest, and help us define how we should measure. And we want you to do all of that for us.
Wow,
That's
that's for
one
the
model.
Fortune 10, right? Which is like counterintuitive, right? If you think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah,
Wow.
we're really fortunate that we
Yeah.
serve over half of the Fortune 50 here alone.
Wow.
And when you zoom out a bit to consider the Fortune 100 and then 500, we have really great exposure there as well. And that really goes back to the point that we're seeing is that for as large as the creator economy is today, depending on what numbers you wish to believe globally, be it $26 billion USD, or I just saw one the other day for $47 billion USD, nearly double. Regardless of what those thresholds may be, what we're finding, of course, is that having credibility in this space is more important than ever. There's a lot of interest in doing buzzy things or shiny coin things from upstarts, but ultimately the reason that we hear time and time again from our clients and customers is they seek to come to IZEA because you can't replicate 17 years of experience, and you certainly can't replicate easily the kind of expertise that we have across the entire breadth and depth of the creator economy today.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned a few of those reports, the 47 billion, right, which is a figure I also, read about. And I know that as IZEA, you are also researching and publishing a lot of reports, okay, that I'm reading probably for the last decade. And the 47 billion, I mean, it's important to define what it is, right? So what is the definition of it? Because we talk about services, we talk about the technology aspect of things. There's like the general merchandising value of the transaction. What does these numbers are referring to?
Well, that the devil's in the details as
Yeah,
always, right? And I think
sure.
that the quick answer is it's all of those things and more, which is what makes it both exciting and also a little blurry from a trying to quantify it perspective. But generally speaking, it ranges most importantly from the payouts that go to creators themselves. And I think starting there is a really important point to talk about
Mhm.
because a creator today in 2024 runs the gamut from celebrities and athletes, more of the traditional celebrity endorsement angle of the spectrum, all the way down to micro and nano influencers. And then more prevalently, in recent years, it also involves unpaid advocates, meaning converting your customers into creators who are generating content and sharing other types of things, but not necessarily in the conventional means.
Yeah.
So that's the largest bucket, of course. Then you have all of the different services fees and technology fees that go into fueling the ecosystem. And last but certainly not least, is all the other types of tools and subservices, whether it be legal, whether it be financing, all of those types of things that are less sexy and
Mhm.
would normally be considered below the line, I guess, that all pull into that bucket. And I think that's the most fascinating thing from my chair when I think about the creator economy in the lens of how we think about traditional advertising is that firstly, it transcends the entire brand house, right? The byproducts of this work can be as fundamental as in very efficient, scalable content creation on
Mhm.
one hand, but then you have all the byproducts of the media math from the exposure and the engagement. And then, of course, working its way through the brand house, you even have positive uplift on things like SEO, which,
Yeah.
as we know, is more relevant than ever when you consider the costs of SEM overall.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And then you start to think about, okay, well, if it's impacting the brand house, how does that really start to challenge the way that you look at above the line versus below the line investment and gain efficiencies from doing that. So for me, coming from a pure play marketing background into IZEA and into the creator economy, it's really helped both challenge the conventional norms, but also really break some of the dysfunctional dogma, is what I refer to it as, that has been accepted over the last 20 to 40 years in our category, that our space really seeks to help reinvent.
Exactly. And I totally, if I hear you say what you say, so you talked about SEO, you talked about acquisition, advertising. I mean, if you look at the acquisition cost today, which is getting very, very high on all the platforms, CPCs are higher than ever, right? And obviously SEO is like the big players game, right? You need patience, you need investment. And so influencer marketing is like probably the highlight of any marketing plan for any brands these days. It's like you're like bypassing all these, you know, challenges and pains, right?
You certainly have the ability to do so.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing a tectonic shift inside the brand house as well right now, right? Because what a CMO is not only charged with doing, but what is the demographic and psychographic profile of that CMO is changing at the very same time. And it's not to say that CMOs who are raised on buying broadcast television are incapable of understanding the benefits of influencer marketing or the creator economy. There are certainly many that have embraced it. But what really gets me excited is I look at the rising class of CMOs. They are increasingly women. They are increasingly people of color. But most importantly, they are individuals who were raised with an integrated marketing mindset. So when you think about sort of the Procter and Gamble way of going to market from 30 years ago, it was very concise, but it was also very siloed, right? You had your media silo here, you had your PR silo over here, you had your comms silo adjacent to it, and you had your brand silo that kind of oversaw all of it, right? The challenge, I think, in modern advertising and marketing, and certainly the opportunity for what we do at IZEA as it relates to the creator economy, is that if all of those silos stay siloed, you actually don't recognize the full benefit of what these things can bring to the brand itself. And so this next generation of leaders just thinks differently, which really bodes well for what we can offer, and doesn't think about how do we look at this only from the PR lens, right? We're just looking for share of voice these weeks to increase. Well, actually, they're hiring teams of people who say owned and earned aren't dirty words in the same swim lane. In fact, they should be there together. But it requires a different way of looking at the world, and it requires, frankly, a different type of workforce who not only is accustomed to doing that, but really continues to push the innovation with that mindset.
Yes. And this is what you mean by integrated marketing, right? It's like a sphere of a lot of different marketing activities that needs to be holistically aligned together. And this is probably what makes the attribution side of things very, very challenging, right? And we know,
no doubt.
yeah, we know it's getting sometimes people, I mean, they don't know how this purchase actually happened, where it started, how, and I know you're doing a lot on attribution and analytics. Let's dive into this topic.
Yeah, I mean, look, attribution has never been more possible. That's the blessing, right? From a marketing perspective. At the same time, I also don't think it's ever been more convoluted.
Yeah.
And it's convoluted for a variety of ways. I think firstly, we have to recognize that this isn't to chastise marketers, but there are still thousands / tens of thousands of businesses that really don't have a grasp of what drives the results of their business to begin with. So whenever you add in a wholly new, super fast growing category like the creator economy, that's always going to complicate matters, because for some businesses, take casual dining, for example, they have just grown accustomed to the fact that if I buy a lot of broadcast TV and maybe even connected TV, that drives X. right? That's just ingrained in their mind, although there's really never been the proof positive. And by the way, I'm not knocking on TV or CTV. It's just sometimes you tend to hold things holy as a brand because you've always done them, and it's actually too big of a risk to stop doing them or change up the mix because you really don't know what your drivers were in the first
Mm-hmm.
place.
Yeah.
So like that's the first part I think that's going on. The second part that's going on is if you look at certain sectors, whether it is automotive, whether it is FMCG or CPG, some of these have their own very specific means of being able to think about what attribution truly is or
Mm-hmm.
could mean. And that also has prolific consequences to where in the funnel are you talking about something. So, for example, inside of General Motors at the Cadillac brand, they're looking to affect every single portion of the purchase consideration funnel. That's very reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd like to have attribution at each of those different points so they can help their dealers sell more cars. Key word there being dealers, right? These are independent franchisees who have their own metrics of success and who co-op budgets to help fund the brand overall.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a packaged goods manufacturer has the other kind of burden and blessing that is their retail network. And increasingly, the retail media networks that are the gatekeepers to being able to help that attribution come to life. So to your point, nowadays, a modern execution in, say, influencer marketing can articulate every single step of that full funnel, which is really exciting. Like 5-6 years ago, that really wasn't the mindset, and some of the technologies didn't exist.
Yeah.
Today, and a lot of this was born out of the pandemic, which was that I could show a CPG manufacturer that was trying to drive sales at a Kroger grocery store that even if we didn't have swipe data from someone physically going in that store, I
Mm-hmm.
instead could use location data to infer that someone saw this Instagram reel, which led to this impression or engagement, which then led to that individual going to a curbside pickup at that
Yeah.
Kroger store.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds very fantastical and kind of crazy, but today in June 2024, that is just the state of the art. That is the table stakes of how you think about these campaigns. The truth of the matter, though, is that some brands aren't set up to be able to realize all the benefits of that. So when we get into a conversation, especially if it's high enough up in an organization that may still have some silos or some walls where not all the teams are working together, it's a dialogue to say, let's bring the analytics and measurement folks from your side into this dialogue, because it isn't just, oh, let's go have someone make pretty pictures on this platform or cute videos on that platform. It's to say we intend to measure this and have the benefits act like an annuity for the brand house, not just be a PR initiative or
Mm-hmm.
a social initiative. And that dialogue is so critically important to have.
Very, very critical. And this is the role of technology in retailers and in brands is becoming more and more. I mean, it's not nice to have, it's must have, right? It's mandatory. It's like the foundation of the future of businesses. And obviously technology slash the AI aspect of things, talking about attribution, I think is very, very critical, very important. I want to do a short pause because we mentioned a lot of terms, right? You talked about
Sure.
creators, influencers, UGC, CGC. How do you, I mean, and you have that perspective of 12 years with IZEA, and IZEA is like, correct me if I'm wrong, more than 17 years in the business, right?
That is
So,
correct.
and those terms are being redefined always, right? So going to 2025 maybe, or towards the second half of 2024, how do you define these various terms?
Great question.
Mhm.
So, an influencer is the most conventional thing that I believe most marketers and consumers understand. This is an individual who has built a following off of creating wonderful organic content. But then also, because of that organic content, sponsored opportunities have been presented to them. And by and large, those individuals are compensated on a cost per post basis. And it's usually for an individual campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when that individual is perhaps locked into a larger or longer term opportunity, they may convert from being what's called an influencer to being an ambassador. So an ambassador is someone who might be, I would really like, Joe Q Public to be locked in to work with brand X for 12 months.
Like longer
And
term
that's
engagement, right?
right. And that individual may do dozens of campaign activations during that time. They may even physically be brought to different events or to the corporate headquarters. Those are really how you encapsulate an influencer and an ambassador. Now, underneath that, the sizing, if you will, of how do you classify these influencers really runs the gamut as well. We talked about micro and nano influencers earlier in our talk. Those are individuals who are more likely to be, say, a next door neighbor or a relative that may not have millions of followers, but they have a really credible following of hundreds or thousands. And so the strategy of harnessing micro and nanos today is that it's all about scale. You may have hundreds or thousands of micro or nano influencers in an execution. Moving up the chain, you have mid-tier or what we call everyday influencers. These folks have hundreds of thousands to low millions of followers. And then, of course, as you go up the chain to macro and celebrity and athlete and sort of web celeb talent, that's where you get into your millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of followers. That's generally how you bucket these individuals together. Now, CGC and UGC, these they feel like they would be synonymous, but there is an important difference. UGC has been around now for nearly 20 years. Of course, stands for user-generated content. By and large, what separates UGC from CGC is the compensation. UGC is the idea that I'm just going to ask people to create content, and I, as a brand, will benefit from the byproducts of that request and may repurpose it to use it in different places. CGC is a nuance that says, okay, if we take what makes an influencer an influencer and decouple the content creation from the follower base, what would that look like? So meaning I may have a micro influencer with a couple, call it 20,000 followers, where I might pay that person ordinarily $2,500 to create some content and send it to their followers. The concept of CGC stops at, hey, just create great content. And I'm going to take that content and maybe put paid media against it. I may place it in store for a shelf talker activation. I may use it for pre-roll inventory and a plethora of other things. But it basically allows a creator to enjoy different classifications of work and really scale up the way that they can monetize the entirety of who they are as an individual and as a brand themselves. Because sometimes, while the follower base is fantastic, that may not be the goal of what the brand is trying to achieve by activating a lot of scale.
Yeah. And it seems there is an increased importance for communities, right? I mean,
tremendously. So then you have advocate marketing, which I think is one of the most interesting. When we talked about a marketing annuity, this is a prime example of that, where you're inviting your customers, and we see this a lot with brands of all shapes and sizes. They may have amassed a CRM database over the last 15 or 20 years, but other than sending emails or text messages to those individuals, there's really not a lot of connective tissue. And so to be able to have in a community, say we have a client, Kasori, that makes air fryers, amongst other things. And believe it or not, because foodies are an awesome community that likes to exchange ideas, whether it's recipes or different occasions to involve food in different kinds of life's celebrations, they leaned heavily into advocacy marketing because they had one of those great databases of email addresses, but that's kind of where it stopped. It was very one to many in a traditional sense, not a many to many mentality. So instead, we invited that database in to an advocate marketing community. Those advocates now are charged with doing different types of tasks. We call them challenges, where they can earn virtual currency in this community. There's a forum for them to exchange information with one another. There's a place to be able to contribute content that may show up on the brand's website or social handles or even their mainstream advertising. And it allows the brand to have a dialogue with their customers, not just, hey, let me send you another pretty email. And let's face it, when we look at open rates today, email marketing is still an effective tactic, but that efficacy continues to decrease over time.
Yes.
So it's my belief that fundamentally brand leaders are realizing that they have to form different types of relationships with their most passionate customers. And those can't just be in the form of traditional reviews or email.
Yes, and this makes the engagement between brands and creators much more probably strategically or longer term, right? Those ambassadors, as you mentioned, because brands can build communities, and probably the smaller one, it takes a lot of effort, time, and dedication. But if they cooperate with the right talents or creators, they can actually, develop a community in a again, those bypassing tactics using influencers and creators, and develop a quick type of community that is resonating with the product. The sentiment is very positive and can create a buzz around it as well.
That's exactly right. I mean, what you'll often see is that advocates can become ambassadors, just like how influencers can become ambassadors. And that provides a tremendous amount of optionality and versatility for brand leaders, which
Yes.
of course we love.
And this also means that the industry is getting more and more complex, right? I mean, and we know that creators are diversifying, right? The brands they have so many communities they need to attract and spread resources across the board. So how do you see the creator economy as a whole with this extra complexity and diversification? Maybe for both creators and brands.
Yeah, I mean, starting with creators, I think it's very easy to jump to a false conclusion that creators are these entitled individuals who sit around in mansions in Beverly Hills and just collect paychecks all day long for looking pretty, right? Like that could not be further from the truth. In fact, I think it's never been harder to be a creator today, even though there's more opportunity than ever before at the same time. It's the reason why you're seeing specific management and talent representation just for creators, because they need help on the assembly of opportunity side of the equation and making sure that their business affairs are being overseen. You're also seeing specialization for creators in making sure they're protected from a legal and a tax standpoint as well, which is, again, a good thing, not a bad thing. But they also have the pressure of figuring out what is the proper ratio of organic to sponsored content creation in general, and on which platforms should they be publishing that content. You mentioned earlier on in our talk how IZEA publishes a great deal of third-party research, and that is not only a point of pride for us, it's actually a point of function and education as well. We recognized a long time ago that being able to not just be the standard bearer for the creator economy, but to educate all of its different constituencies was not only an opportunity, but an obligation to be able to advance the industry. So literally every 3 to 4 weeks, we come out with academic level white papers and research on various corners of the creator economy, and studying it from all these lenses that we're talking about here, the view from the creator, the view from the marketer. And then, of course, I think most importantly, not to discount those first two audiences, but what does all this mean for the consumer? Because it's also become, while we have all of these incredible tactics across advertising and marketing, it's oddly become never harder than to reach the consumer.
Yeah.
and actually break through. And I think in part why influencer marketing, why advocate marketing, why the creator economy does so well is that at the end of the day, consumers are being bombarded with more advertising than ever. But at the same time, while there's always been the goal for addressability and customization, I actually think it's very old school that consumers relate the most to authentic storytelling from a
Mhm.
voice that they trust.
Yes.
And so it's the reason why you see creators developing both short and long form content on more platforms than ever. Our research indicates that this year, the average creator is creating on 3.4 platforms on average. And that's unique
Mhm.
content creation. You also then see the syndication of content across a variety of additional platforms, which takes that primary content and repurposes it for certain other platforms as well. And then from a marketer perspective, yes, the ratio of dollars in their spend is leaning more and more and more to creator economy stuff. That's awesome for our business.
Sure.
At the same time, they are realizing that they need to have responsible adults around the table with them, because there have been a number of very high profile misfires because look, everyone wants in on this space. But what happens, at least from the history of marketing when that happens, is that you get a lot of fly by night operations that pop in to make a quick buck. And then when the stuff really hits the fan, you start
Mhm.
to realize that gosh, that company isn't around or isn't as well
Yeah.
prepared to handle certain circumstances. And I think fundamentally, top brand leaders recognize that. And they also recognize the need for specialization. Coming from having worked at a number of very successful ad agencies in past lives professionally, I'm often asked, well, gosh, we're starting to see the agency holding companies want to get into this space.
Hmm.
What do you think about that? And my typical reaction or response is that no different than how I probably wouldn't go to my general practitioner doctor who is wonderful if I have a bad cold or an allergy medicine refill need. That person is a medical doctor and
Mhm.
went to medical school,
Yes. He's a
but
generalist,
it
right?
is a generalist.
Yeah.
What I really want is the person who also went to medical school, but as the expert, if God forbid I was having a cardiovascular problem or a neurological issue, I would go to the specialist. And I think that in a high stakes environment, the same is exactly true in the creator economy right now. The agency holding companies are wonderful and gifted generalists.
Yeah.
A company like IZEA is that specialist, is that trusted adult around the room.
Yes, and it seems that everything is getting specialized and you require more and more expertise. By the way, both on the back end side of things, operation, and definitely on the marketing, and no
Yes.
one no one has experience and can know everything, right? And know how to make decisions. So the trend now is all the fractional CXO, right? I mean, work with people who are expert in specific areas and try to learn and evolve from there and get that external help, which is definitely something that I see here in the podcast as a trend by all the brands, and this is definitely the right way to go. So I want to go back to the integrated marketing
Sure.
uh, topics, and what are some of the tips you can provide to brands to start implementing integrated marketing, and definitely influencer marketing? Creators economy is part of that as well. So I would love to get your perspective on this.
My first piece of advice would be to look at your org chart and ask yourself, take a hard look in the mirror and say, does the org chart drive your decisions, or do your outcomes or desired outcomes drive your decisions?
Nice. Yeah.
And the fundamental truth, which I think a lot of people, if you're in a sobering conversation or one of the quiet tables at a South by Southwest or a CES or a Cannes,
Mhm.
is that unfortunately, for many organizations, some of whom are very successful, they still allow their org chart to drive their decisions as
Yes.
opposed to the desired outcomes. That's thing number one. Thing number two is when you look at the type of people that sit in your organization, are they also generalists, specialists, or are they somewhere in between where they're curious and intelligent enough where they can run into what I think is the next generation of marketing, which is agility marketing?
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned like the fractional CXO. I actually think about our space in the creator economy just being a subsegment of the larger gig economy.
Yeah.
And so you're right. You're going to see, more on-demand experts being plugged in on a task-based or a campaign-based basis. And actually, I think that stems from the mentality that the consultancies, having Deloitte and Accenture and EY now in the advertising space has also changed the game of the way that CXOs evaluate these things.
Yeah.
And that would lead me to my third part of the equation is like, I'm a huge believer in the future of technology. I wouldn't be at IZEA if I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I'm also a believer that technology should never lead, it should always follow, meaning with your end in mind, by understanding what the outcomes are and what ultimately needs to happen across the brand house to drive those outcomes. I too often see disappointment from brand leaders who view technology as being a silver bullet, that if you put that first and then align the people behind it, something magical is supposed to happen. And lo and behold, doesn't always work that way. And that's because we're in this point where things are changing so quickly, and you have to be able to make good decisions on whom to trust in all the fronts, whom to trust as your services providers, whom to trust on what technologies you should choose in your stack, and then ultimately who to hold accountable to all those things, that it can make that process blurry. Yeah. So my advice would be to really, again, think with the end in mind. Don't lead with that technology, lead with the outcomes, and then work backwards to establish who in your organization should you lean into, who should you bring from the outside on a need-based basis to help augment that perhaps, and more importantly, how do you stay as agile as possible? Because if the last 4.5 to 5 years have shown us anything, it's that the winds of change are blowing more fierce than ever, and you have to be equipped to turn on a dime, even if you're one of the most successful brands in the world.
Yeah, and I like the org chart reference, and exactly you talked about the wheel of change. I mean, things are changing so fast, and if you have the wrong org chart, I mean, you move very, very slow. You might take the right decisions, but implementation is very, very slow, and it's become not relevant actually.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a believer that time is a thief, and time kills all momentum in marketing, unfortunately. And I think there's a difference between being agile and being reckless. And too often, I also believe that those things can be quickly contorted as hey, let's slow walk this. Let's test and adjust. Test and adjust is fantastic, and it's fundamental to being agile. The problem is if your testing window is measured in quarters, I have to imagine your shareholders or your consumers or both may not be as patient as you are to that test and adjust cycle.
Yes, there are so many alternatives out there, right? It's why, by the way, retention is so important, right? We know that acquisition is becoming more difficult, so a lot of focus on retention. And retention, you need to be agile. You need the attribution, and you need to have the right processes internally to quickly adapt, right? So that's.
I completely agree, and that's why we've seen this direct correlation between advocate marketing and retention that is just so powerful. Because to some extent, I don't think that it's rocket science. It's just you're taking your most valuable customers and your most passionate customers and creating a marketing community just for them. That to me is commonsensical, but it also can transcend a lot of the dogma that does exist around retentionomics and helps cast it into a new light. So if that can be helpful, hey, that's a win in the end.
Yes, and a community is just creating a space for the members of the community to talk between themselves, right? It's
That's
not
right.
a place to promote products or functionalities or new features in your roadmap. Create a space, an open space for the members of the community to talk between themselves about, what they're passionate about the pains and whatever things they want to achieve. And this is, I think, one of the major tasks for any CMO out there. Ryan, amazing. And this is the time in the episode where I usually ask my guest about a fun fact about themselves. Would love to hear a fun fact from you as well.
Oh gosh, I think my most cheesy fun fact is that my brother and my wife share the same name. So my wife is Jamie Schram, and my brother goes by Jamie Schram, which is much to her chagrin because my brother is legally James, but my parents called him Jamie from birth. So when someone says Jamie at a family gathering in my family, two heads turn to look every single time.
Nice. Thanks. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Amazing. Ryan, anything else you want to add or share with us?
No, I really appreciate you having me on. And what I would add for your listeners is that we've talked about a lot that this is a fast-moving, fast-changing space. So the best you can do for yourself ultimately is to also be a good student of it. I would shamelessly offer that our blog at IZEA.com/blog publishes thought pieces on the space twice a day, every day of the business week. It's I think a great resource for people who are interested in understanding the pulse of what's happening in the creator economy. At the same time, there's never been more in-person events. It frankly, for me, as someone who lives on Zoom most days, perhaps one of the best things about the post-pandemic life is being able to get back and use eye contact, which is the most underrated of all human features, to be able to talk about these things and exchange ideas.
Yes.
And so really challenging yourself to think in an agile mindset, to be creator and customer centric, and to realize that all of that attribution and measurement opportunity is out there. But sometimes the biggest blocker for marketers is themselves. So looking inward and understanding those things in combination with one another is a recipe for success, not only this year, but as we look to 2025 and in the future.
Yeah, and just go out there and seek help. Don't hesitate, right?
There's lots out there.
Yeah. Ryan, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's my privilege. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.